Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the Marketplace Risk virtual event series. My name's Andrea, and I'm the Director of Events and Logistics here at Marketplace Risk. Today, we welcome our presenters from Identiq, WAG, Upwork, and Fiverr. Our virtual events are designed to help marketplace and sharing economy startups successfully navigate complex risk management, trust and safety, compliance, and legal subject matter so they can avoid distractions in order for them to focus on launching and growing. Be sure to check out marketplacerisk.com to access hundreds of hours of content, including our master's program, platform podcast, and previous live events, and to subscribe to our newsletter where we keep you up to date on everything, including the upcoming Sharing Economy Global Summit in London. If you're interested in presenting at the summit, please submit your proposal on our website by August 15th. We'd love to see you there. Thank you for tuning into today's session, Mitigating Marketplace Risk, the Gig Economy of Fraud. First, a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so the recording will be available for you to access on our website. Second, all attendees have listening capabilities only and are otherwise muted. And third, do submit your questions via the control panel. If we have time at the end, we'll answer as many as we can. If we don't get to your questions, feel free to email us at info@marketplacerisk.com and we'll get your questions answered. And now, without further ado, I'll hand things over to our presenters.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and thanks to Marketplace Risk for hosting this webinar. Thank you to all the participants for joining us here today. We have a great panel for you on mitigating marketplace risk, the gig economy of fraud. We have folks on the panel with great experiences, insights, and stories to share. You will note that we have billed with 4 fantastic panelists, and currently we have 3 of the 4 fantastic panelists. Ronnie from WAG unfortunately has been caught up in a real live fire drill in his building. We hope that it is only a drill. Obviously, many of us do get caught up in metaphorical fire drills in our regular daily work, but this is unfortunately a real one, so he is dashing around trying to find a place where he can put his laptop down and join in. Hopefully, he'll be able to join in soon, so he'll just fit right in as soon as that's possible. In the meantime, we're here today to talk about the gig economy of fraud, which I have heard jokingly referred to as Mules 2.0, but I think you will agree by the end of this webinar that it's even more than that. Please send your questions in during the panel. Send now if there are pressing topics that you would like to hear about from the get-go, and please feel free to send them all the way through as the discussion develops. It's really such a dynamic and fast evolving area. Your questions will really help us to make sure we cover the areas that you're most interested in, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. In the meantime, I'm really happy to introduce our panelists, and I'll hand over to each one briefly to say hello and give a quick bio so that you know the background that they're coming from. Caitlyn, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Shoshana. I'm Caitlyn McNerney. I'm the Director of Trust and Safety Operations at Upwork, and I've been in the trust and safety space for just about a decade now, specifically focusing in on marketplaces as they're scaling and bringing trust and safety to bear across the product experience and our operations teams. Great to be here.
Amazing. Daniel?
Hi, thanks, Shoshana. I'm Daniel, Payments Risk Analyst at Fiverr. I've been in the industry for just over 5 years. Yeah, excited to be here.
And Uri?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Shoshana. I'm Arad. I'm one of Identiq's co-founders, heading the product and analytics function at Identiq. Prior to Identiq, spent many years at PayPal, leading groups of fraud analysts and data scientists, and with the pleasure of fighting fraud of all of its forms.
Amazing. I'm Shoshana Marini. I'm the co-author of Practical Fraud Prevention, published by O'Reilly. So I am fascinated by all forms of fraud, and gig economy is one of the most interesting and fastest evolving at the moment. So there is loads to talk about today. Okay, first question to kind of set, I think, a firm foundation for the discussion. What does the term gig economy mean to you? Daniel, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so basically I've seen the gig economy from both sides, mostly from the good side, Payoneer, Fiverr, but really with more recently with the growth of work from home that's been pushed by COVID, it's really opened up a whole new field for fraudsters. They're able to scale up, they're doing much more faster, and they're moving money around a lot easier.
Caitlyn?
Yeah, I think I've had a similar experience where, there's so much upside in the opportunity for the gig economy during my time at Etsy and now at Upwork, seeing opportunities for people to connect all over the world. Of course, though, fraud is going to follow whenever we have a real shift in how we are working and how people are connected. And so, I think of it as sort of fraud outsourcing of what are those opportunities where fraudsters can scale their operations. And that benefits them because it's not only helps their ROI take on some tasks that they might not otherwise want to invest in. But it also means that they may be less likely to get caught. And so, it's really on our side to make sure we're recognizing how they're working in this space and what we can do to uncover them.
For sure, and you guys have such a fascinating perspective on it from both the fraud, trust and safety, and the victim side, almost the people who are tricked. Uri, what does the gig economy of fraud mean to you?
Yeah, I think first of all, Daniel and Caitlyn, really gave a very good reference to what that looks like. And I think from my perspective, when I think about it, everyone, I think in the media, in the movies, it's always like, the fraudsters like this guy, the seller with a hood, etc. But today, fraud is becoming such a sophisticated professional game, like with different people in different roles, etc. It's almost like and you can think about it, it's like like a capitalist economy and specialization happening in the fraud world just as much as it's happening everywhere else. And really, in the same way that today we outsource and we use services, to build big and help us with different parts of our business, we're seeing the same thing. Part of the fraud operation being more sophisticated, more efficient, etc., is also outsourcing and using different people to perform different parts of the fraud operation.
So it's true that that's been a factor for a long time. Recruiting participants from the general public, hiring mules has been around for probably almost as long as online fraud has. But it's only recently that it's really expanded into a fully fledged gig economy of fraud freelancers. What do you think is behind that shift?
I can kick us off there. So I think for me, there's a couple of key trends that have come out of the pandemic in the last couple of years. And, one of that is that there's a lot more interest in working from home remote work, which I think has a seismic shift and is opening up how we think about work in so many ways. And I, see that firsthand in my day-to-day. As I mentioned before, fraud will find those opportunities. And if there's a seismic shift in how we are working or how people are getting paid, they're going to find their way into that. And so one of the ways that we're seeing that is, remote work being more common. And so they're going to migrate to that. And the second is that I think we're seeing, a next generation of fraudsters. The payment protection, the payroll protection that came out of COVID was one of the biggest fraud I think we'll probably see in our generation. And so I think that introduced a lot of people who were not yet familiar to fraud to get a taste for it, who are now continuing. So I think we're kind of seeing a rise in people who are maybe more comfortable in this space than they would have been before.
I think I'll just add to what Caitlyn said. Obviously, during Corona, we sort of thought this hybrid work environment was just a temporary thing. We're definitely seeing on our marketplace that it's here to stay, obviously with the opportunities. And the victims really to the gig economy here, they're looking for opportunities online. There's a lot of confusing things going on. There's NFTs, there's cryptocurrency. A lot of things sound really good to be true. You're hearing stories and sort of just falling victim to all these schemes.
Yeah, and I think if we build it then, so I think, Daniel, you're talking about the opportunity. I think that on top of that, a lot of, the fraudsters, especially like we're talking about Corona, and now we're talking sort of post-Corona and, potentially, going into a recession. We're also seeing, a lot of people on one hand trying to make ends meet. At the same time, we're seeing people that have been used to get some things and looking for new opportunities to make additional revenue. And I think that combining that with the general attitude toward large corporations, etc., also make it easier for some, make the leap if you wish, to take part and participate in some activities that they might have not thought of as an opportunity before.
So then, slightly worrying thing about what both Uri and Daniel said is like looking past Corona into post-Corona and potentially some kind of economic uncertainty period. Those are not factors that are likely to be shifting anytime soon. What's that going to mean for the gig economy?
I think that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Uri.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, I think for the gig economy, one of the things that still is very standout to me is that the majority of activity going on in this space is very safe and people are doing great work in this space. But again, like the opportunity is going to arise. I think what we're also now leading into is we're looking at the economy shifting. Uri, I think you're starting to speak to this around, what does that then mean? And I think most of us who have been in this space for a while and we've got years of experience on this panel, know that when the markets are down, fraud is up. And so we've all got to be really conscientious. And so while, we've navigated around some of the pandemic surprises around fraud, we're now looking at, what is the economy going to do in terms of impacting fraud? And I think, that's a really key aspect of what we need to think about. So yeah, I don't think that this is going away, but I think that we need to be constantly up-leveling the way that we're thinking about it because, fraudsters are not amateurs. They are highly connected. They know what they're doing. And so we need to be similarly connected on our side if we're going to appropriately fight it, as we all do.
I completely agree. And I would say, even like we talked about the opportunity that Daniel mentioned about like new stuff, like, that may be confusing to consumers. So that's also creating the opportunity. But I think there's potentially also a necessity that connects to the opportunity, because if we also could think about, people spending so much time in their homes and actually not being able to go to stores or, go outside the house to potentially perform some sort of scams, but then also connect to that the improvement in some of the risk mitigation capabilities and, PSD2 in Europe, etc. So I would say that we're also seeing push that would force fraudsters to evolve. And I think that what we're seeing is part of that evolution of more fraud shifting from offline to online and then starting to evolve inside the online world. And I think that the better our tools are at, identifying like repeat fraudsters, etc., the fraudsters are going to find a way to sort of bypass those capabilities. And to an extent, have many people who participate and, partake in different parts of the fraud operation is really a good way for you to avoid those detection capabilities.
And there's this additional vulnerability here because we're saying, well, the fraudsters are very sophisticated and just continually more so. And we're trying, obviously, to react to that. But if we're talking about the gig economy of fraud, we have this whole vulnerable population of people who are often tricked, misled into engaging in being part of a fraudulent activity, sometimes a key part of a fraudulent operation, who often don't know what they're getting themselves into. And, they are not sophisticated. They are often chosen because they're not sophisticated. They're not aware of the dangers. And potentially, going forward also, especially if there is some kind of economic uncertainty and people perhaps more desperate for work, that one's a tricky one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which ties into a question we have received from the audience. They're asking for examples of types of fraud that fit into the gig economy. And I know all three of you have some great examples to share. So, feel free to start with ones you've seen many times and include any creative ones as well.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about this, gig economy of how these fraudsters are thinking about it, there's the traditional methodology of, shipping physical items to someone, having those reshipped to prevent triggering fraud alerts and mismatches that, it makes it much harder for payment risk teams to identify those. We also see things like setting up accounts, in a legitimate customer's name who isn't going to trigger, and then, potentially trying to pass those along. And so I think that makes, verification across a customer's life cycle so important, not just looking at this up front, but like continuously evaluating who your customers are. And then I don't want to cover all of them, so I can certainly hand it over to the panel for some additional examples there.
I think just to add to that, a good example that I know of is obviously we said it's going beyond just Mules and the gig economy. Fraudsters are now breaking up the tasks that they're doing, and essentially they could be purchasing a completely legitimate task. So something like website design, which a fraudster could have a legit designer design their website. They have no idea that they're part of a bigger fraud scheme, and in the end of the day, the website's then used to commit fraud against someone else. Obviously having the envelope of everything looking good surrounding the scheme, good website, legit contact details, all of that, obviously is helping the fraudsters.
Yeah, and probably just adding to those examples, we've seen people opening bank accounts and then using those bank accounts, or even applying for credit cards or debit cards, and then connecting them to other financial activities. But using bank accounts, opening those bank accounts, using those bank accounts to withdraw money. So especially in marketplace kind of scenarios, having money being withdrawn, money being sent to them, and then transferring this money further. We've also seen cases where people, and this is probably more related to some of the regulated industries, people are being asked also to create some sort of fake document, some of the English checks that we're all familiar with.
Yeah, and Yuri, I think you raise a really good one there around where someone who is, being contracted as a mule there then could become a victim themselves, in terms of they're setting up a bank account, sharing personal identifiable information with this individual that they don't realize is part of a criminal fraud ring. They're likely going to see that be abused for other nefarious purposes beyond that. And so I think oftentimes people don't realize just how much they're putting not only others at risk through this type of work, but also putting themselves at risk. And so we kind of get the message out there as to like all the reasons to stay away from this and to be really conscientious about how you're conducting yourself online. I think that's a really good point. So great choice.
I think one of the issues there is obviously we're talking about a recession. People are losing their jobs. They're looking for money. They don't really have the liberty of going in there. They're seeing these jobs advertised. They're seeing posts on social media for some sort of freelance work, and they're taking it up, even though with hindsight they could see that it wasn't okay. When they're in the middle of it, it's not so clear all the time.
Yeah, and
How often do you think they do know?
I'd assume that a lot of them can, especially when we're talking about freelancers that are getting thousands of jobs a year. I'm sure they can pick out the ones that don't look good within the rest of them. But really, by splitting all these sort of tasks up, they can, fraudsters can make this look really, really legitimate.
Mm.
And I think how much someone knows in these situations really exists on a spectrum. On one side, we've got folks who it's been so diluted and broken apart that it's really impossible for them to know that they're engaging. And there's others who may start to see certain signals, or, are sort of wondering how they are making money this easily, but maybe are willing to turn a blind eye to some of those kind of questions and underlying concerns there. So I think the majority are not necessarily aware, at least to the full picture of what they're getting themselves into. I think especially those who are voluntarily sharing PII with criminals. I don't know a lot of folks who would do that knowingly, and seeing that type of activity is definitely concerning.
Yeah, I think the fraudsters did get much better at having a good story that at least has some plausible explanation. I think that with that said, in most of the cases, when you look at the offers, they often look too good to be true. It's like really easy money, and I think that's where there's this area where you say, it's like a gray area where there's like a level of will participation. I think that, as you said, in hindsight, I think most people would look at that and would say, well, I'm not sure that they should not have, it wasn't clear to me. And to an extent, I think it's also a little bit similar to what we learn and what we are familiar with in the world of spam. Like you see all of those spam emails and Nigerian prince stuff, and you always look at that. So, but it's so obvious that the email is there's spelling mistake, and it's all there's a lot of signals. And I saw some research that actually says that the mistakes are there for a purpose. Because in a way, if someone is sophisticated enough to notice the mistakes and will not fall for the scam, that's actually people that the scammers do not want to deal with. They want to deal with the people who might be a little bit less sharp, a little bit less aware, or potentially willing to ignore those signals. And I think that that's also part of the thing. Like a fraudster wouldn't like to spend all this time trying to recruit someone, and then once that someone, after a couple of tasks, realize that something is fishy, and then they just wasted all the time on training someone to do the job. So I think that they're also intentionally not trying for the offer to look like too legit.
And I think that's where all of us play key roles within our organizations, is how do we train and teach and provide those learning opportunities for our customers to know what to look out for? Because when they are newer to a platform, they're still learning the terms of service and so forth. Some of those things might not stand out to them. And so how do we make that really clear of here's how you can protect yourself, and really use that as a transparency moment for trust and safety to be front and center in their mind's eye.
So you think specifically for marketplaces, because you play this dual role with buyers and sellers, but you're protecting and interacting with both, the educational aspect is really important.
I think it is, especially for those who are newer to the platform. Those who have sort of gone through these experiences a couple of times, they start to get a really keen eye around what is and isn't okay. But if someone's new, they may not be as accustomed to what some of those tells are and so forth. And obviously on our side, we are looking to detect and enforce and remove proactively the vast majority of the time. And so making sure that for anything that may get through, that then, folks who are on the platform know what to look out for, so that they can also do their due diligence in the process. So, I think in any marketplace, it's super important just to let folks know what they can do to keep themselves safe while we are also doing our jobs in keeping them safe.
It made me think of PlayStation has, you can tell I have a child. They have these prompts for adults, for the parents, to encouraging them to self-educate about the different things on the platform and some of the dangers, and also the possible risk that your child will not be as responsible with your credit card as you imagine that they will be. And they really do push this kind of educational thing as a teaching moment for the parents. And in the same kind of way, I felt great about it. It really did make me feel like they were trying to take care of both my child and myself. And I think, for a seller to feel that the marketplace is investing in their safety in the same way is a very powerful thing.
And I think that's just one of the ways you can think about building trust. It's not just about repairing after the fact. It's about where are you providing that education and transparency and equipping your customers to make the best decisions possible.
I think to add to that, we've definitely seen, obviously, with the integrity teams and the trust and safety teams that are always proactively, like Caitlyn said, looking for things like this. Once we catch it a few times, we educate. Anything that we're proactive about, it's really noticeable also that fraudsters understand that there's someone on the other side, and then they'll go look elsewhere.
Nice. This ties into a question we have coming in. What is the best way to educate gig workers on fraudulent activities or the risks of?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been like taking a multi-pronged approach and recognizing that people are going to seek information elsewhere. So how do you offer that in a number of different ways? So, you know, there's in-product experiences, there's onboarding information, you know, you post things in your community and really make sure to like spread that wealth and not just rely on like one means of communication for getting that message out there. So I think diversify to make sure that like people are seeing this content and aware, you know, because there are jobs that should light up people's eyes and get folks really excited about remote work. And so we want to make sure that they're seeking out those right opportunities.
I have a follow-up question from someone. How do you get the balance right between educating them and not freaking them out?
Yeah, I think I'll take that follow-up, but I think it's all about like really making it clear what they can do for themselves and how they can like be enabled, not just around like these are the risks, but here's what you do to avoid those. And you know, I think that's for us, it's like, you know, no matter how good it may look, if you're being asked for payment, if you're being asked to go off platform, something's amiss. Regardless of what the story is behind it or like how good it looks, if either of those things are happening, you may be being targeted. So, you know, just really making that clear. And so just saying, you know, it's not just for our terms of service, while those are really important that we ask you to do these things, it's also for your benefit and your safety, that you stay on platform, that you don't make payments, you know, off and so forth. So I think that's really just like making clear what's in it for them around their safety and like how they can take the steps.
And I think also you can build it as something that happens in context to something specific. I think that's always better than something which is just like general education that may come, you know, at the beginning or at the end of the session in some pop-up or email, because those things do tend to be ignored. But if you have the ability to identify when there might be something which is really potentially a risky operation, and then if you can combine your education sort of in the right context, that's much more effective. And specifically, I think for marketplaces where you do get to see both ends of the deal, then you do have actually an advantage. I think it's becoming much harder, like if you're like in an e-commerce scenario, or if you just see one side of the transaction, then it really becomes much harder.
I think to add to that, also obviously having the tools to find the situations where, you know, there could be an issue, but then giving the users the tools also to report and then engaging them with them afterwards. Once you give someone the ability to report any suspicious activity that's going on, you know, our teams are there 24 hours. They're able to respond. They're able to get back to them and confirm if it, you know, it was fraud from our side, it wasn't fraud. It really helps them learn, and then, you know, with any marketplace and or any, you know, situation like this, people are obviously in their own forums. They're then going out and telling the story to other people, and it's really the best way to spread it, I think.
Daniel, I think that like we can really enable our communities. Like we've got our trust and safety teams within operations, but then our entire community can be set up to be like this extension, you know, and enabling them to know what to look out for and protect themselves and one another is so important.
So we have a question drawing us back to the kind of more trust and safety fraud prevention side of it. Although I think we are very firmly agreed that the education piece is really important because they are kind of your partners there. So someone picked up on the word life cycle, which I think was interesting to people. What would the life cycle of verification, say that 10 times quickly, the life cycle of verification look like on a marketplace? You're all very polite. I'm just going to pick on somebody. Daniel, go for it.
So obviously, I think Caitlyn before spoke about the onboarding and verification at onboarding. Something that we've definitely noticed on our marketplace is that as you know, there's always the question of friction, but as we're more knowledgeable about who's using our marketplace and who the people are, we've sort of raised the bar. Fraud originally it happens in the the lower quality areas of any marketplace. So as you push the marketplace quality up, sort of the fraud sticks out at the bottom, and it's really much easier to catch. It sort of becomes the low-hanging fruit there. Obviously, you're also able to sort of use a tiers of trust approach. So by understanding who's getting onto the platform and how much you know about them in the beginning, you can sort of limit certain whether it's payment methods, limit certain features to them, anything like that. And then as they're on your platform or marketplace longer, you sort of trust them more, and you can move them into different tiers as they go along.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think, a couple of years ago, we all probably would have said, oh, if somebody's been on your platform for a year, they're trustworthy, regardless of what other activities we might have seen. And, we can't take that at face value anymore. We need to really understand our customer, what they've been engaged in, how much time they spent on the platform, because, these fraudsters are going to use gig workers to, get some cursory data in there. To potentially make it look like somebody's a little bit more engaging, because they are going to want to blend in. And so we've got to take a more keen eye around, like, what is the total interactions and kind of like customer journey? What have they done on our platform? How have they demonstrated that they're trustworthy? Kind of like what's going in the pluses, what's going in the minuses column. I think that's really important, and kind of when we're speaking to life cycle, how I think about that. It's not just like one verification at one moment in time. It's really about looking at this at multiple moments and thinking about it more holistically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, not only in marketplaces, in my mind, I think everyone where you have any sort of ecosystem or any sort of a community, I think that too often we've seen that, the managers of those communities, the trust and safety managers, there's always like the preference to sort of like push verification or push, like monitoring to the last possible moment. But sometimes if you wait for the last possible moment, you might not have the time to take appropriate actions without creating too much friction. So I think that, verification should start when the account is created. And I think that it's really about the art of figuring out what level of verification you need to perform at every time, and also how to create a differentiated treatment for different users. It's not just, I think, Daniel, you talked about the tiers of users, but it's really about, figuring out, based on activity, based on tier, based on, what can you figure out about them, based on, different services you can use. And, if that's someone that they're trusted and they're in a good reputation in general, maybe from outside sources, maybe by working with and collaborating with other companies like yourself, and then that might be something where you can actually give them a much, bigger set of operations and leniency in what they can do. And then if it's someone that maybe is like, I don't know, completely new and doesn't have any reputation or any kind of way for you to verify who they are even, then maybe you want to be more careful about what you allow them to do and when you allow them to do, and how much you're sort of looking into what they're doing. So it's really about combining all of those things together, and I think trying to get like the right balance between great user experience, but at the end of the day have those intervention points at the right time.
I liked what the kind of a combination of what you're saying and what Caitlyn said before, that with the consistency, that like, okay, well, we check this now, something's changed. Does this still work? Do we know? Does this still make sense within what we know about the customer, or what other sources know about the customer? If not, maybe there is some kind of it could be ATO, or frequently now in marketplaces some kind of gig economy aspect where you're like, well, we've this account has been farmed out to somebody who's been thinks they're potentially doing something very legit, running this service or the shop, and now it's been handed over to the person who's planning to monetize it in a less than ideal way.
I think we've seen ads in social media about we're looking to buy eBay accounts, looking to buy different marketplace accounts, etc., with good reputation in more this many years, etc. So you have to assume that at any time the user that you may know or the account owner might not might no longer be the account owner. So that's also something you probably need to look for. Anything that content monitoring speaks directly to that.
I think I can also add to that, and obviously classically the ATO, a lot of the tools and rules to catch ATOs really look at the email's been changed, the password's been changed, all other indicators that they've looked for, but obviously there are accounts being sold online. There are accounts where the person's logging in with the same email, same password, same IP, nothing's changed, and there's other behavior that we need to find in the users to understand it's really a different person.
And equally to look for signs that no, it really is the same person. It's actually they just happen to be on a new device, or they've changed something in a legitimate way. Yeah, that balance is always so interesting. So we mentioned social media a few times now, enough that I think it's worth kind of flagging in this context specifically. I think in general, of course, social media plays its role in the fraud landscape, but I think more here than is average. How do you see the role of social media in recruiting, working with these contractors, playing a role in the gig economy of fraud?
I can kick us off. I think, for me, it's just acknowledging that there's a bigger picture than what you may see in terms of activity on your platform. So, you may see that or you may not see that the recruiting is happening on social, and then, the account and then payments happening somewhere else. And so while you may not have all of those pieces in terms of investigating, knowing that this is the type of activity that these fraudsters are engaging in, where they are spreading that around, helps in educating your teams around what are the signals to look for, how do we do that type of open source monitoring and so forth, so that we understand what's shifting, what's changing, what's their methodology, because it's unlikely we're going to see the full story within any one of our areas of work. And so understanding how does this happen, and being able to understand is there a legitimate customer story here, or is there something more nefarious at play?
I think also when we speak about social media or just any trends, it's easy to tie that into obviously current events. One example is the situation in Ukraine. That's something that, as an example, we can really see both sides. Fraudsters came in and were able to affect it. Obviously, fraudsters posing as Ukrainians, for whatever schemes they were doing, were able to find victims that way through social media or through many different marketplaces. But definitely from the side of marketplaces or any companies, obviously a lot of companies went out and changed features, made certain things available specifically to people affected by the fighting, and in an attempt to try and help. And fraudsters came in and took the opportunity. They were able to pose as Ukrainians, have access to features that were really limited to people that were affected. And it's important to be cautious at the same time. Obviously, you're trying to help, but at the same time, there are some people that are acting suspiciously, and you really need to draw that line of who's who.
And I think that social media is also allowing many of the fraudsters to put legitimacy to their offering, because at the end of the day you don't know who's who. So their ability to post the offering and then at the same time comment on their own offering or retweet them or add a discussion, which might look a discussion of legitimate users. Actually, some of those users might be mules themselves, which are asked to like and redistribute those messages. But that also creates a lot of the FOMO, a lot of the feeling of, there's so many people and they're making a lot of money, and why wouldn't I, and they seem to be legit, etc. So it's also allowing the fraudsters to build them legitimately, to reduce and sort of diffuse some of the red flags that users might have, and at the same time sort of play into their sense of missing out. So that combination is just helping them to recruit more people more easily.
Building off of what Daniel was sharing, I think I've seen that so much throughout my career of, if something is happening in the world or there's a crisis, especially during my time in e-commerce, it was like something would happen and it was immediately up on the site in some form. And you never knew quite what shape it was going to take, but it was particularly harmful when it was capitalizing on a tragedy or an event like a war and folks who are legitimately impacted and looking to reap the benefits of that. So it's definitely one of the darker sides of this fraud activity when there are real victims in the world that marketplaces are looking to help and support, and they're going to take advantage of that. And so I think from our trust and safety lens, we're always looking and working with product to say, okay, if we're going to offer this, here's how we can expect fraudsters to move into that space, and here's how we make it safe and available to the folks who are deserving of that benefit, as opposed to just saying like, we can't do that because fraud's going to move in. It's just about like striking that balance to say, here's how we make sure it goes to the right population.
Yeah, and I think that so frequently your earliest adopters are going to be the fraudsters.
Always willing to try something new.
Yeah. And I think it takes, the typical customer a little while to find those things. They're not necessarily actively seeking them out. So if you're seeing like a huge surge on day one, take a close double click into that.
Fraudsters are looking for anything new on your website all the time, but they know it's new. They know that probably your controls might not be as tight, and marketing might be just looking there just to get more something going on.
I think sometimes even before things are happening, we definitely saw from the Ukraine example, we definitely saw that before anything even started, when it was just in the news, we could see that fraudsters were already preparing for these opportunities just in case something happened. That's
wow.
Yeah, that was interesting to see. Obviously, because it's happening before anything happens, it was much easier to pick up, but they're there and they're ready.
At least if you're very on top of it, then you know what to look for going forward. It does give you a bit of an edge if you're, very proactively looking before it even kicks off.
I think one of the things that I've learned in my career is that if we're speaking internally about a business continuity through an upcoming issue and how we're going to manage a potential crisis, we also need to be thinking from the mindset of how are fraudsters going to use that to their advantage at the same moment. So anything that's sort of like top of mind within the company, also make sure that trust and safety is in the room, thinking through like, how could this be made to, to the benefit of fraudsters and to the disadvantage of others.
Thinking about the gig economy of fraud, if the financial situation does become more fraught, are there things that marketplaces can be doing now to prepare themselves for whatever might be coming? Everyone's like, we don't want to talk about this. We don't want to think about this. This is not a nice topic. Sorry.
Yeah, I think obviously all of us covered it a bit, but definitely, by raising the quality of who's on the marketplace and keeping it really high level, high quality up market, any influx of new people, if we do go to a recession, specifically when we're talking about freelancer, communities, any influx of new people will really allow us to put focus there because we already know the people that are on the marketplace now.
And I know we've spoken a lot about external communications and communications with our customers and education opportunities. I also think in those moments leading up to or when we're facing recession, there's a lot of internal knowledge building just around what that means that, fraud will attempt to increase, because I think sometimes there are pressures during such times, especially potentially in e-commerce spaces where spending may go down, to say, hey, how do we look for opportunities to growth? Maybe we relax here at a moment where we actually need to be really diligent. And so I think just being a really strong voice with your organization to say, hey, here's where we can take those opportunities and here's where they're going to be looking for that right now. And I think we all saw that at the start of COVID, where a lot of new folks were moving online, folks who, weren't purchasing as much. Companies wanted to drive purchases, and so we're more willing to, run promotions that were getting taken advantage of. So it's really important just to kind of get that message out of like the kind of counter-cyclical nature of fraud in that respect.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think that the communication internally and just making sure that people are aware of what's coming, I think is so critical, because unfortunately, what you're going to see at the same time is both a drop in your legitimate activity, and at the same time a rise in fraudulent activity. Exactly at the same time where actually the company is striving to make more revenue. So as I've seen this happen so many times where like you're being asked to loosen the control exactly when you know that this would be completely very costly. And I think that has to be made clear. And then as far as the business decision, I say there's always like the facts and then the business decision to make. And I think that it's important that the facts are there, because otherwise we don't want the executive team to make the wrong decision.
I think also, so obviously Caitlyn mentioned having trust and safety, having risk in the room, when any decisions are made. I think it also goes a little bit further, at least, customer support teams need to know what the risks are at the moment. CSM teams, business teams, any client-facing teams, especially if you've got examples to show them cases that happened, stuff that was stopped, really so it's clear to them, because risk and business is sometimes on two opposite ends, and obviously it needs to be made clear for each side what the dangers are.
Yeah, that customer support relationship is so important, because I think most of us who are in the trust and safety space have, that kind of very inquisitive bone where we're going to question pretty much every activity and really dig in to understand. And, the role of customer support agents is that level of empathy, engaging with the customer, really trying to see things from their perspective, as they rightly should with the right customers. Unfortunately, now I think some of the gig economy activity that we see is around social engineering that. And so making it really clear to them what those new tactics are, what information we can and can't share around an account, because a lot of this tactic is around getting them information that they otherwise wouldn't. And so, sharing kind of what's out there and to what degrees they'll take, because they're really convincing. And even a highly trained customer support team, if they're not aware of what might be happening there. So it's so important that we're sharing that knowledge around those like social engineering trends and so forth.
I do think marketplace trust and safety and risk teams have a slight advantage over e-commerce, in the sense that, yes, there is this tension between business and risk prevention, but within the marketplace context, the fact that you are preventing any harm coming to the trust of the marketplace is so obviously also a good thing for the business. It's fundamental to the nature of the business and to its success in the future. So I think this whole webinar is about like the gig economy of fraud, which is so much harder on a marketplace, but at least there is this kind of balancing factor where the trust factor is so obviously crucial that you don't need to argue for it so much internally. You just have to kind of point and go, remember this? We have a couple of really fun questions. Somebody asks, what is the hardest type of gig economy fraud to identify, and how do you do so?
I personally think it's like we've said a few times in this this call, is when it looks completely legit, when someone's I used the website example before, but when fraudsters are coming, especially we mentioned social engineering, we mentioned scams on social media, when they have a good looking Instagram page, they have a good looking website, they have all these things that they've broken down, and they're really going to a high quality freelancer, getting him to do his actual job completely legitimately, sometimes not even with stolen funds. They're paying for it because that amount of money that they're paying to get whatever done is worth it in the long run, because it's much less than what they're getting in their schemes.
And as both of you know, the right relationship with the right freelancer can be gold. to a good business, but unfortunately also to a fraudster. You know, it's worth paying them real money if you want to keep that relationship going. Caitlyn, hardest type to uncover, and how?
Yeah, I almost don't want to tip my hand as to where they should focus on. So I'll speak rather broadly to this one. I think that one of the things that's so important about these conversations is that where they are, expanding across multiple, channels and so forth to conduct this. And I think it's where, the network that you create is so important in mitigating that, to understand like what are the trends happening. We may not be in a payment space, but we need to understand what's happening in payments and so forth, so that we understand like, okay, where's the money going to flow to? So even if it's happening somewhere else, we need to have that like network knowledge and always be learning so we can put those pieces together. It does certainly make it trickier as things expand, and you may be plugging different elements in to your platform. So really seek out the information to know about those, even if you don't think they directly touch, because for fraud, they're going to be using probably all of them.
We have someone asking, what are some key data points for connecting suspect actors? Link analysis, something like that.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of, it's not necessarily like one key data point at any moment in time. It's really about understanding who your customer is and when you start to see unusual changes. And I want to be kind of appropriately close-lipped here, but I'm happy to connect with somebody in more detail. But like really understanding, where did we think we know one thing about this person and now we're seeing different behavior? And so really just understanding your customers and what about them, so that if somebody else is now behind an account, that's much more evident.
Yeah, I'd say probably the most sensitive or the most hard to manage point in time is really when you have a new customer. It doesn't matter which side of your ecosystem, if this is on the supply or demand side of your ecosystem. This is probably the hardest time for you to manage that type of fraud, because obviously there's not a lot of activity to go on. And I think that, yes, trying to look for links or trying to look for suspicious activity is one way to go, and I think that's very effective. But many times the fraudsters are, already sophisticated enough to know how to avoid those links. And in that point, I think one of the things that can actually work well is also to trying to figure out not only if that user is connected to some other bad activity on your own platform, but also trying to figure out whether that user is legit or not, and whether that user has like a real footprint in the internet, real legit identity. And there are different ways that this could be done, through collaboration, both automatically or through manual, but of course, depending on the size and sophistication you want to go to.
We have a follow-up question to, I think, exactly to Uri, what you're talking about. What is the best method for identity management and validation?
So I let Caitlyn and Daniel go first.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I would say that your table stakes are going to be looking at realness and liveness, especially from a maturity standpoint, before you're enabling a lot of activity. So is this a real person, and is that person also sitting at the computer or in front of the phone that's being operated? And that's going to get you a long way. And then there is also whether you choose to partner or build internally to say what other platforms has this individual been used? How known are they? What is their history? How trusted are they across the internet? So, there's a number of options there to, further bolster how much you can know about a customer. And that then enables you to say, oh, okay, like this person looks very legit. We've got really strong signals from them, and we can then enable them to do more versus someone who might be really new and we know very little about, and we need to therefore be more cautious. So yeah, I would say kind of the table stakes, and then I think the network benefits of, you know, plugging into other sources is kind of the further emerging and just continuing to like make leaps and bounds in the last couple of years.
I swear I did not plant this question, it just came in. It's, can anyone recommend partner platforms for customer validation and identity? Guys, this is an educational webinar. This is not a promotional webinar. Please, like, we would love you to check out Identiq afterwards. We have a very unique, fun way of doing great identity validation. And yes, it is very partner-based. It is very collaborative. But I think maybe we will hand this question to Caitlyn and Daniel before closing out.
Yeah, I want to be cautious not to provide any endorsements at this time, but I would say a great resource for folks within the trust and safety space that's not a particular vendor, but a way to talk to others about what vendors they use and what makes sense is look into the Merchant Risk Council in regards to who other people are using, what kind of, you know, because a lot of it is finding the right fit for whether you're in e-commerce or another type of, you know, tech business. So, you know, not every like one size is going to fit all. So there's definitely folks who specialize in different areas. So talking there with folks who are in a similar place to you and may say, hey, this is working really well for us, is a great way to get a recommendation. So I'll steer clear of specific vendors that we're utilizing right now and have had a lot of success with, and just say, like, you know, it's going to be specific to your space, and that's a great way to connect on that.
I think the plug for, you know, the collaborative aspect and to draw on the fact that the industry is so willing to share expertise, definitely worth including there. Okay, Daniel, do you have like a 1 minute answer here? Conscious of time.
I'll just add to what Caitlyn said, obviously not to endorse anyone or anything, but at the end of the day, all the companies, obviously, even in a competitive space, we're all on the same side against fraud. When fraud is up on one marketplace, they'll learn the tricks, you know, they'll learn somewhere and they'll move to the next marketplace. So sharing, finding out from other companies in the space what works for them, you know, not really trade secrets, it's just helping overall fight.
And that is why Marketplace Risk is such a great organization. And thank you very much for hosting this, guys. Okay, so I'm very conscious of time. So from the panelists and myself, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us for this fantastic discussion. I hope you found it valuable. If you enjoy webinar panels, we are hosting a second one. This time sadly not with Marketplace Risk because it's not entirely marketplace focused. It's for e-commerce more generally also. It's a very timely topic, something that actually has come up a few times here. It's about in economic uncertainty, prepare for fraud, where we'll be discussing how to prepare your company and fraud team for whatever is ahead during this interesting period. And I'll be joined by Holly Sandberg, Ticketmaster, Carice Hendrick, who you may know from Fraudology podcast, and Uri, who is with us today, will be joining me then as well. And they'll be sharing their experience of previous similar periods, discussing trends, suggesting what they think might help you to prepare your company. And there will be time for questions, as in this webinar. All the questions will be part of the webinar. So please come prepared with questions. You can find that webinar by searching for Identiq on LinkedIn and clicking the relevant post or checking out our blog. And with that, Andrea, thank you so much. And thank you to Marketplace Risk.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you to our presenters. As a reminder, check out marketplacerisk.com to access this recording along with hundreds of hours of content and to subscribe to our email newsletter to stay up to date on all events. Thank you everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.